A country doesn't change its name without reason. And when a nation that's been called the same thing for 2,000 years suddenly tells the world to call it something else, that's not a rebrand, that's a signal. In 1935, Persia became Iran, and the story behind that single decree reveals everything you need to know about empires, identity, oil, debt, and the dangerous game of trying to escape history. Because Persia didn't just disappear from the map, it was buried, deliberately, strategically, by the very forces that had been bleeding it dry for a century. Welcome to the financial system. Control the money, control the history. And remember, simple is never easy. To understand why Persia became Iran, you first have to understand what Persia had become by the early 20th century. And the answer is uncomfortable. Persia had become a debt colony. Not formally conquered, not technically occupied, but economically controlled by foreign powers who had learned a simpler truth. You don't need an army to own a country. You just need a loan. The Qajar dynasty had ruled Persia since 1789, over a century of kings who excelled at one thing above all else, selling their country piece by piece to stay in power. The pattern was always the same. A Qajar Shah would need money for wars, for palaces, for lavish trips to Europe. And rather than reform the tax system or develop the economy, he would grant a concession. Mining rights, railway rights, tobacco monopolies, telegraph lines, each one a slice of Persian sovereignty handed to foreign hands. By the turn of the 20th century, Russia controlled the north, Britain controlled the south. The 1907 Anglo-Russian Convention formalized what everyone already knew. Persia existed on paper, but in practice it had been carved into spheres of influence by two empires who didn't even bother consulting its government. Persian officials signed whatever papers were placed in front of them. Persian treasuries paid whatever debts accumulated, and ordinary Persians watched their economy hollowed out by forces they couldn't see and couldn't fight. Then came oil. In 1901, a British speculator named William Knox D'Arcy negotiated a deal with the Qajar Shah that would change the Middle East forever. For £20,000 in cash, £20,000 in shares, and a promise of 16% of future profits, D'Arcy acquired the exclusive right to extract oil from nearly all of Persia. No Persian was allowed to audit the books, no Persian had any say over how the profits were calculated, and no Persian imagined just how much oil was actually there. 7 years later, in 1908, D'Arcy's engineers struck oil at Majid Soleiman, the largest discovery in the Middle East up to that point, a gusher that shot 50 feet into the air. Within a year, the Anglo-Persian Oil Company was founded. Within 5 years, the British government had purchased a controlling stake. The Royal Navy was converting from coal to oil, and Persia had just become the fuel tank of the British Empire. From that moment on, Persia's oil belonged to Britain. Persians extracted it, refined it, loaded it onto ships, and watched the profits sail away. The refinery at Abadan became the largest on Earth. By the 1920s, it was generating more revenue for the British government in taxes than Persia received in royalties. Persian workers lived in slums. British managers lived in garden compounds. And the company's accounting was so opaque that even Persian officials couldn't figure out how much they were being cheated. This was the world Reza Khan walked into. A military officer from a modest background, he had risen through the ranks of the Persian Cossack Brigade, a force originally trained by Russia to keep the Qajar Shahs in power. After the chaos of World War I, during which Persia's declared neutrality meant nothing and foreign armies trampled across its territory at will, the country was in ruins. Famine had killed hundreds of thousands. The economy had collapsed, the central government barely functioned, and the last Qajar Shah spent most of his time in Europe, supposedly seeking medical treatment, while his country disintegrated. In February 1921, Reza Khan led a coup. With 1,200 Cossack soldiers, he seized Tehran and installed a new government. Within 2 years, he was prime minister. Within 4, he had deposed the Qajars entirely, and on April 25, 1925, the Iranian parliament crowned him Reza Shah Pahlavi, founder of a new dynasty, named after the ancient Persian language itself. Reza Shah had one obsession: to make Persia modern again. Not modern in the Western sense of democracy or individual rights, he had no interest in those. Modern in the sense of infrastructure, industry, and independence. He looked at what Mustafa Kemal Ataturk was doing in Turkey, abolishing the caliphate, adopting Western dress, building railways, suppressing traditional religious authority, and he wanted the same transformation for Persia. The problem was money, and the only real source of money was oil, and the oil belonged to Britain. Reza Shah spent years negotiating with the Anglo-Persian Oil Company, trying to revise the humiliating terms of the D'Arcy Concession. He demanded a larger share of profits. He demanded Persian workers be trained for senior positions. He demanded the right to audit the company's books. The British refused, delayed, obfuscated. In 1932, enraged by a particularly insulting royalty payment, a pittance during a year when the company's taxes to the British government exceeded what Persia received, Reza Shah did something unprecedented. He canceled the concession entirely. The British were stunned. They threatened, pressured, brought the dispute to the League of Nations, and in the end, Reza Shah backed down, but only partially. A new agreement was signed in 1933, extending British control for another 60 years, but improving terms slightly. It wasn't a victory, but it wasn't total surrender either, and it signaled something important. Persia was no longer willing to be silent. This is the context in which the name change must be understood. On March 21, 1935, Nowruz, the Persian New Year, Reza Shah issued a formal request to all foreign governments: stop calling us Persia, call us Iran. The reasons were layered. Persia was a Greek word derived from the ancient province of Pars, where the Achaemenid Empire had originated 2,500 years earlier. It was an exonym, a name imposed from outside. Iranians themselves had always called their land Iran, meaning land of the Aryans, a name embedded in Zoroastrian scripture and Sassanid inscriptions. It was older than Greece, older than Rome. It was the name the people used for themselves. But there was more to it than etymology. Persia carried baggage. It conjured images of decadent shahs, crumbling empires, and foreign domination. It was the name associated with a century of humiliation. The Qajar capitulations, the British and Russian spheres of influence, the oil concessions that had turned the country into a resource colony. Reza Shah wanted a break, a new identity for a new era. Iran was meant to signal modernity, unity, and self-determination. Some have suggested the change was influenced by Nazi Germany, which was Iran's largest trading partner by the mid-1930s. The Nazis had their own obsession with the word Aryan, and the coincidence of timing has fueled speculation. But this interpretation misses the deeper history. Iranians had called themselves Aryans for 3,000 years before the Nazis twisted the term. The name change was not a gesture to Berlin. It was a rejection of London. The transformation went beyond the name. Reza Shah built the Trans-Iranian Railway, 1,400 kilometers of track connecting the Caspian Sea to the Persian Gulf, funded entirely by taxes on sugar and tea rather than foreign loans. He founded the University of Tehran. He mandated Western dress. He banned the veil. He centralized power, crushed tribal autonomy, and suppressed the clergy who opposed his secularizing reforms. Iran would modernize, whether Iranians wanted it or not. But the same forces that had controlled Persia did not simply disappear when the name changed. In 1941, Britain and the Soviet Union invaded Iran, citing Reza Shah's refusal to expel German nationals. The real reason was strategic. The Trans-Iranian Railway was the perfect supply route to send weapons to the Soviet Union fighting Hitler. Reza Shah was forced to abdicate. He died in exile 3 years later, bitter and broken. His son, Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, took the throne, and the struggle over Iran's oil continued for another generation, culminating in the 1953 CIA coup that overthrew Prime Minister Mohammad Mossadegh and restored the Shah to absolute power. So what does the name change really mean? It means that identity is a battlefield, that nations rewrite their stories to escape the weight of the past, that economic dependence creates political humiliation, and political humiliation eventually demands a response, sometimes symbolic, sometimes violent, sometimes both. Persia didn't become Iran because Iranians forgot who they were. It became Iran because they remembered and decided the old name no longer fit a country determined to control its own future. Whether that future was ever truly theirs to control is another question entirely. History doesn't repeat, but if you don't understand it, it'll crush you all the same. If this gave you a new perspective, hit subscribe. Its financial system and history leaves clues. I show you where the money leads.